And when I came to work in Neve, the focus of Neve is on people who have experience of mental illness. And one of the things I did after a short time there was I commissioned a piece of research, which was to ask the people who used Neve services, people who had experience of mental illness, if they had any experience of the conflict, if they had been involved in any atrocities, if they'd been involved in any of the things that had happened. And over 40% of them came back and said that they had, which is a statistic that kind of concurs with other statistics that we see in society. But what was very interesting was when they started to talk about that, they described coming into the mental health system and nobody ever asking them the question that we had asked. And that is that trauma repeats itself or remains alive within us unless it is appropriately dealt with. So let me explain. There are three. I'm going to put this slide up and I will repeat this slide at various points because I want you to think about these three things and translate them into your own experience. The key component of trauma is that as an experience, it does not get processed in our psychology in the way that other events do. So if I use the example of my mother, I was very distressed when she died. I went through a grieving process. I felt very depressed. I was sad. I was upset. I was angry. I was all of those things. But as time went on, those feelings changed. And my mother's death, rather than being a sort of a present reality for me, became something that became part of my memory. I remembered it. I could talk about it with friends. I could share it with other people. It wasn't something that necessarily evoked the same powerful emotions that I felt at the time. And so what was happening? Well, through the process of grieving, through my own internal processes, I was processing that experience. Brandon frequently used that term this morning, the importance more of process than of outcomes. And if we're given the time on an experience like my mother's death, as we go through the process, our experiencing of it will change. When we go through a trauma, or when something is a traumatic event for us, it is that processing that is compromised. And therefore, the experience doesn't subside. The emotions associated with it don't go down. Our thinking about it doesn't change into a memory, but it remains present and live and active within us day after week, after month, after year. And that's why when I used the example of my time in Cruise, when you're dealing with someone who has had a traumatic bereavement and you talk to them, if you don't know the circumstances of that bereavement, you would swear blind that it happened yesterday or a week ago or a couple of weeks ago, when actually it could have happened 20 years ago. Because the component of that experience which is traumatic holds it in a person's mind and in their experience, in their body, in a way that does not change. It does not get processed. It remains live with them. And that's why people will talk about flashbacks or re-experiencing. And re-experiencing is not just remembering that something happened. It is what it sounds like. It is actually re-experiencing again the fear, the anxiety, all the emotions and all the feelings, even in a physical way, associated with that experience. Whenever I would hear a door bang shortly after my Malawi experience, I would go slightly into shock. I would tense up. I could feel my stomach tighten. I would start to sweat. I would go through all of those reactions that I went through the night that happened. It was no different. I could hear it. I could smell it. I could see it. I could have an image of it. It was real. And when something remains that real, it becomes profoundly disruptive in our lives, in our relationships, in the way we seek to do business. And so the second two sets of symptoms there are a consequence of that. So remember, if something is so alive as an experience within me, then what obviously I am going to do is avoid things that might stimulate, bring back to mind, reinstigate those emotions. So if I am feeling so fragile, so scared that this is going to happen again or that this event is going to pop into my mind, then I will start avoiding things that have any chance at all of stimulating that thought in me. I remember working once with a lady whose husband was an RUC officer and he had been murdered. He'd been killed in the Troubles. And for 15 years, she would not drive past the place where he was shot. And sadly, that was the only exit out of the town in which she lived. And for 15 years, she drove out the other way, out round the country, to get to where she was going. Understandable, as I know, but part of that was the fear that she had that if she went past that spot, that it would bring this all back to her. So avoidance is completely understandable when you think of the fear and the anxiety that people have, not about something that is out there anymore, but it's now about something that's internal. So they've internalized that anxiety, they've internalized the experience, they're holding it as a memory, but something much more powerful than a memory. And so what they're frightened of is not the reality around them, it's the reality that they carry with them. So when we talk about dealing with the past, and we use phrases like that, it's complex and it means different things to many different people, but for many traumatized people, we're not actually talking about dealing with the past. We're talking about something which for them is present. The sense of reality with which they feel fear, anxiety, the sense of threat that they feel makes no sense to the rest of the world who hadn't been through those experiences, but for them is very real and very tangible. If you talk to people in East Belfast about the flag protest, many people throughout the world look in on East Belfast and look at what went on and say, what on earth is going on there? What on earth is happening? Why are people so agitated? Why are they so excitable? Why does this matter to them so much? It's because what they're reacting to is not just what is presenting to them. What they're reacting to them is a whole story of trauma, of fear, of anxiety that sweeps in behind those issues and carries them along. And so the fear that they feel is real, the anxiety is very real, but it's disproportionate to what they're being presented with. And so the reaction becomes a disproportionate reaction. And the challenge with that is we are not dealing with reality here. You're not dealing with the reality of presenting issues. We're dealing with legacy stuff that's being imported all the time into these really important issues that distort meaning, that change the narrative, that change the import people associate with them. Because of that avoidance that I describe, and as you can see, avoidance is completely understandable when what is being avoided is so terrifying. And the third thing you get is hypervigilance. People become very tense. They become very cautious. They become on the lookout all the time, looking just at every moment for the next opportunity, for the next time that they're going to get hurt. And so their presumption is not that everything's going to be okay. The presumption all the time is negative. Now, I'm describing this mostly from a personal point of view. It doesn't take a lot to translate that into communities. Think about how communities reenact things. Think about how communities enact or hold alive within a communal memory events that happened. And it's not held just by individuals. It's not just held by individuals telling their children. This is held by whole communities who reenact again and again and again through storytelling, through memorializing, through whatever it might be, events that happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 100 years ago. When was 1690? It gets reenacted again and again and again. The consequence of that is avoidance. People start to avoid things which will cause controversy. It means I heard many people talk about elephants in the room. There is a herd of elephants in Northern Ireland. There's so many things that we can't talk about because if we talk about them, they bring up things that we don't know how to deal with. And then lastly, hypervigilance. When you think about what I was saying about East Belfast, many people in our society live waiting to be hurt. They're waiting to be let down. They're waiting to be let down by their politicians, by their clergy, by their civic leaders. There is an expectation that we are going to be hurt, that this is all going to come back. The number of times I hear people talking about, the risks, the fear that we have at the moment, that things will go back. Now, I think there's a very real fear in that, but part of it is this. It is as a consequence of what we've lived through, we now, there is a heightened sense of anxiety.